Welcome back to All That Jam, where music has no limits. I am joined today by Greg Ireland from Green Diesel, hailing from Haversham in Kent. And he is part of a rock band called Green Diesel. They've been around 15, 16 years. Fell in love with it. I'm a huge Fairport Convention guy, but also you really push the boundaries when you catch the live stuff. How are we doing today?
I'm not too bad, thanks. Nice, very pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here.
So what is the difference between in and on?
I was wondering about this. I'm not all that certain, to be honest. I would always go with in, but the English language is one of those things that I think is designed to catch people out. So
Right. And America smacks it around. So
it's all part of the fun, really, isn't it?
It is. I always like to say I speak American, not English, and I try to speak English. Big fan of Shakespeare, but it's tough to figure out what he's saying.
Yeah, I think they put deliberate traps in there sometimes just to catch people out.
It's some beautiful stuff. I tell you what, I don't know if you know this song, but there's a Grateful Dead song called "Victim of the Crime," which is very over the top. And I used the lyrics from it to close my paper on Othello, because it's am I the victim or the crime? Am I the driver, the driven? And it's just totally Desmond and Othello. Anyway, there we go on our first crazy side street. Why don't we start at the beginning? You guys, 16 years in now? Something like that, 15, 16?
Yeah, somehow. I'm not quite sure how that happened. Some of us even longer. There are guys. Well,
2003 maybe.
Yeah, our bass player and myself. We've been playing in bands since then, and we never really found anything better to do. So, but yeah, no, the proper band kind of coalesced about 2009, really, when we kind of started having ideas and a violin player and that sort of thing, and a kind of a sense of what we might want to do. And somehow we're still here today in some form or another. Anyway,
is the violin the thing that turned it, that pushed you towards the? I mean, there's such a beauty to what you do. I have a deep appreciation for English folk stuff, Irish folk stuff. I'm half Irish. If you pull me back, my dad straight came from Ireland. So I have a real appreciation for it. And you guys, lean into it. Was that the moment, having the violin and saying, yes, now we can do it?
I think so, yeah. Some of us have been knocking about, sort of playing mostly covers in a kind of vaguely rootsy sort of sense, but very much guitar, bass, drums. And it all started, I'd gone down a big Fairport kind of
Richard Thompson.
Exactly.
God bless that man.
Exactly. And I think originally I managed to convince the others that we would just do a piece, like a set of tunes at a festival we were playing. And they said, yeah, let's give it a go. And we got Ellen in, who was kind of known to us, and that went well. And that sort of gave us the courage to kind of press go, and off we went, really.
Right. Having a female voice is really sets it apart, because you get that other point of the storytelling, which sometimes is lost in folk, rock, anything down the line,
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a really important part of our sound, and I've always, I think having that you get some quite interesting contrasts in folk, because you can play around with who the stories from the perspective of and things like that. But also Ellen's just got such a beautiful voice that it's a really nice kind of setting as part of our sound, and then the rest of us can kind of do a bit of harmony stuff in the background and things. So
right, exactly. I'm looking at we'll go through the past albums. We're going to do this in reverse today. The new album, I'm looking at the one sheet you guys sent over, which was fantastic, because you had different members talking about different songs and really gave a glimpse into different, the perspectives of the band. But the songwriting credits, a lot of them come to you. What is your process there?
I People ask me this a lot, and I'd love to have a sort of pat answer of this.
What day of the week? It's what day of the week, huh?
Yeah, but I just absorb stuff over time, and I have a list of ideas and a list of little bits of words and bits of I suppose it's the reality of the modern era. You've got your phone if you've got an idea on the guitar.
It's always been like that, though. I used to work at a grease pit, and when I took a walk, I'd take a pad and write down things that I thought.
Exactly.
Through the shift. It's these fragments that you can build, right?
Yeah. And, so that, there are ideas in songs on this album that are, 10 plus years old. Maybe not complete songs, but they sort of wait for their time.
That's why we have notebooks.
Exactly. I'm not like we were saying before we went on, I'm not a computer person. I have a stack of notebooks of just ideas and doodles, and just ideas kind of come together. Sometimes other songs, the album's going to be called Onward The Sun, and the title track I wrote very quickly, and that was very much a complete process of the music and the lyrics and the idea kind of all came out as one. And
sometimes the muses are like that.
I would love to. I would love to be able to understand how and why, because then I'd be a lot more productive. But it was a good week, and it appeared. Other times they take more work.
I love it was a good week. That's perfect. Yeah. So you have your song, you have the inspiration, you lay it down in your head. I'm sure that you put it on tape so you don't do anything dumb like forget it.
It's happened.
Right. I'm with you. I there's so many. I've lost more good ideas than I've had. I always say that. When you walk into the studio, you play it for the band. Do you give them the freedom to find their place in it?
Pretty much, and that I think particularly this most recent record that's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks. One of the things that I really like about it is so much. Although obviously there are the individual writers who come in with the ideas, but so much of it developed from just jamming in our rehearsal space. Particularly you'd come in with an idea, but we kind of chuck it around. And sometimes, there might be certain points where the original writer has a kind of, I'd quite like this. And, we'll work with that. But usually kind of most things are open, it's kind of open forum. And that's what I really like, is that kind of kicking around ideas. I'm not going to turn up with charts and sort of as much as anything. I don't think I could produce them.
People who do. I've talked to people who used to walk in with the complete vision of the song. They played everything the Prince vision. This is the way we're doing it, which I don't think lends to a band. I think it lends to a leader and players.
I agree. I think part of what makes a band work, and going right back to when I started listening to music, is that kind of strange alchemy between the participants. And you can't replicate that. You can get a whole you can get the hottest players around, pay them the money, tell them what to do, and it will sound great, but it won't have that kind of organic creativity about it. And that's what I really like about our process is the main writer will usually have, if you like, the final say on ideas, but do all sorts. And sometimes we get a bit like the band, and we'll be swapping instruments around, and I'll be playing bass on something, someone will pick up a mandolin, that sort of thing, and we'll just kind of see what happens.
You seem pretty laid back, so I'm sure that that's a good process with the final approval of things there. There's two roads to walk down here, the instrumental and the lyrics. I'd rather go down the lyrics a little bit with you, because what you do is, do you know who Billy Strings is?
I don't know. It's not a.
You should look up Billy Strings. He is playing arenas across America doing bluegrass. Right. Just 5 guys up there, no drums. I mean, it's got to be the cheapest tour to go, whatever. Especially playing the arenas. But you listen to one of his songs and the lyrics to it and the instrumentation, you're like, was that written 100 years ago? or was that written yesterday? And I get that from you.
Oh,
How do you feel like you ground your lyrics in the tradition that you're part of, the English, back to the seafaring, all that kind of crazy stuff,
yeah.
How do you ground it while making it so contemporary and fresh?
I think it's always a fine line to walk, because you don't want to be creating a pastiche. And as we all know, traditional music has its fair share of cliches that you can lean on, but I think it's just that kind of absorption in that world. You sort of just adapt to the kind of the kind of vocabulary and the style. I try not to make it too conscious. I think if I'm thinking about it too much, then it probably needs it needs a bit of a rethink.
Put it away in the back burner for a couple months.
Yeah, but I'm quite influenced by a lot of these very a lot of kind of English poets, like sort of Rupert Brooke and W.H. Davis and people like that, who have quite I suppose you'd call it kind of like quite a maudlin outlook on life, and that kind of that's always a big kind of influence in what I write, certainly. And I started out setting poems to music. I mean, not very well, but that's where I started from. And
can I ask you something crazy? Let me throw you something out to you that I've thought about forever. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you mentioned poetry. Do you think there's a difference between a poem on a page and a song that you're hearing live? In as much as when it's on a page, you can scan it, you can look back and forth, but when you're hearing something live, that line, or maybe the next line, or maybe the one before. So a song almost becomes more dependent on the line than it does the whole.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting. It's almost like as if you like those old kind of fulfill your fantasy adventure books and things like that. So you don't know what's coming next, and then once you do know what's coming next, you're entering a different way of experiencing the music. I mean, it's no one way isn't superior to the other, but it's like it's like the first time you buy when you buy your band's new album, that first listen is always I think quite a special experience, but it's a very different one to that kind of.
And when you want to go back, when you listen to it the first time, you're like, I wish I could listen to that for the first time.
Exactly. And you sometimes those moments have resonance, and you can when you have those really important albums, you can picture where you were. That one of my big records that I love is the Hazards of Love by the Decemberists, and I have a very, very distinct memory of buying that on CD and listening to it in my university little flat, just sat there, and that I will always have that. And God knows how many times I've listened to it since, but you can't kind of replace that first experience, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm like that. There's a woman named Laura Nero who was out in New York in the 60s and 70s, had an album, New York Tend to Bury. And I read about it in a sampler for CBS Records. They're like, you should, if you like this, check this out. So I went and I found it for $1. I bought it. And the first notes I heard her sing, I was like, that's the woman I want to marry. I was like, that's the voice of the woman. I get that. Let's switch to the music. When you're writing songs, does it ever come into your mind how it's going to appear live, or are you strictly like, I just want to get the idea into the universe?
I think a little bit of both. I'd be lying if I've always I tend, if I'm developing something, I tend to have quite early on a sense of how the band might sound playing it. But
after all these years, right?
Exactly. And in some ways that's good, but obviously you want to work against that a little bit. So it's kind of one of the challenges of having done quite a few records now, is obviously you start to develop your own stylistic tics, and you don't want to just repeat yourself over and over again. But I think you know, I quite often can kind of hear, oh, that might sound quite nice. But then equally, there's something nice about, you know, because I tend, not always, but tend to write on the guitar, is just to kind of try and break out of patterns and explore a little bit more, and, you know, try and think, oh, I get the violin to do something interesting here. Because I think that there's I guess, a kind of certain folk rock formula which I love, and you lean into that sometimes, but also you want to kind of try and push the envelope a little bit. So
Well, After Comes the Dark had a noticeable shift into the more progressive, darker evolution of the band, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was really, things had been heading that way for a while, and I think it was just a natural reflecting of our songwriting as well, because we were very much going down more, I guess, kind of I suppose the sort of supernatural side of folk. What, you know, the expression.
The Led Zeppelin-esque kind of tale of what was that? The Once and Future King?
That's that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think the phrase a lot of people use at the moment is folk horror. It's something that's very much in vogue, and I think it, you know, I think that kind of way, and that lends itself to maybe a heavier sound. I think our first couple of records, not exclusively, but fairly, like, I'm mostly playing acoustic guitar, and they have maybe a slightly lighter sound.
You were finding your way. You were kind of, you can hear it through. I love to think of albums like The Artifact. It's where the song existed in that moment. And you go see the band live and you see where the song exists now, because it might not be the same, but that's the beauty of doing albums for me. I know it scares a lot of artists or musicians, because you're trapping yourself in that second, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially when you're developing, you know, but then, you know, there's stuff on our first album that I listen to now, and I'm very much, I do that quite a bit differently. But then I do shows, and there are people who talk about some of those songs to me afterwards, and it's some of their favorites. So, you know, different, you know, people respond to songs in different ways, and kind of, I guess, part of being an artist of any sort is you kind of let it out into the world, and the world might take it in a different way to the way you take it.
I always told poetry workshops I ran, you're throwing your baby out into the world and it's going to get slaughtered, but you hope it walks back stronger for it.
Exactly.
So let me ask you about Rob Wilkes. He produced a couple of your albums, right? Is he on this new one, or is he not?
Yeah. He produced the one, Onward the Sun, which is the new one, and After Comes the Dark, which we put out in, well, I think it came out in 2021 in the end. That was a bit of an odd one, because we were halfway through recording it. Right. Exactly. Rob is a fantastic kind of sounding board producer for us, actually, because he's very he's an excellent musician himself. He's played with a lot of, you know, played with some indie bands around the UK, particularly plays drums with an act called Smoke Fairies, who fantastic. So his input has been, I think, really good for us, because, you know, he's gives us quite a lot of freedom in terms of how we want to approach things. You know, I particularly for this record, but I'm very much a kind of live in the studio guy. So, you know, and I like to have, you know, the backing tracks for this album were all, you know, just, we're in a room and you press play, and I don't really care if the tempo wavers a little bit, and that sort of thing. And he was on board with that.
So no click track.
No, I don't like them. I don't, you know, it's fair enough. You're doing like a big kind of sequenced thing, then obviously you need them, but we're not. And going back to what I was saying earlier, I wanted to kind of capture that organic moment. I mean, obviously they're overdubs on it. We didn't go all get back on it or anything, but you know, Rob was on board with that, and you know, he's got a brilliant collection of keyboards which I get to mess around with and things, and you know, it's just good to have, if you like, an extra sounding board and someone who's in kind of sympathy.
I think it's so important for a band. I have a whole nother channel that I have on YouTube that we talk about fish. And one of my big knocks against what Trey Anastasia, the guitar player, does these days is he records everything himself, no outside input. And sometimes it can seem like it needs outside input.
Yeah. Well, it's that whole kind of sort of auteur, viewpoint. I'm gonna do it from start.
That's why you do workshops. That's why you take your song into the studio and you say, "Here's my rough sketch," and someone's like, "How about this bass line?" And you're like, "That is exactly what the song needed."
Yeah, absolutely. I like to work with an outside producer, ideally, where we can.
Yeah. What studio are you at?
So it's a studio called Squarehead, which is if I said the term Sittingbourne, I imagine most of your viewers would have no idea where that is. But it's also in Kent.
Okay.
But it's quite funny, really, because inside it's this kind of wonderful space of creativity, but it's sort of opposite a car breaker's yard on this kind of industrial estate that looks a bit less than safe when you turn up there. But you kind of walk in and you end up in this kind of magical world of Nag Chumpra and Fender Rhodes and things like that. And again, that's partly down to Rob to be able to kind of create that sanctuary, if you like. But it's a good studio, and we have recorded a bit there, and some bands who we really like have recorded there as well. So, which is how we ended up there. Yeah, it's a great place.
If it's easy and it works, that's what you want to do.
Exactly.
But when you're, let's go live. You got electric, you got violin, you got traditional instruments. How do you balance that kind of energy when you're live? Because an acoustic show is different from an electric show.
It's a tricky one, really. I think we just a lot of it's set list construction, really, and just trying to suss the crowd. I mean, obviously, our material is our material, but there's some crowds where you dial down the jam a little bit and make it a bit more song based, because we have quite an odd contrast where we sometimes will play in folk clubs where people will sit in silence and you can hear a pin drop, and then the next show on the tour will be at kind of a rock night and
progressive electric kind of.
Exactly, and the light show's going, and it can sometimes it can be quite an odd shift, and you have to sort of think a little bit. But we've done it for quite a while now, and I think ultimately we like making noise. We like the show to be loud. It's still quite controlled, but that's part of who we are, and that kind of you just respond to the vibe of the audience, I suppose. And
do you guys lay out songs? One of my favorite bands is called Humphreys McGee, and if you look at their set list, after certain set list it has JO in parentheses, jam out, and it can be like any song on the set list. Do you have certain songs that you're like, yeah, this one we know could run 9 minutes, it could run
Absolutely.
5 minutes,
Yep, two or three like that. It usually depends when Ellen gets annoyed with us playing around with effects pedals and things, and that's usually the point to bring it home. But yeah, we've got a few, and some there's one on the new album which is it's a cover of one of the Wicker Man soundtrack songs, and that has a long jam on the end that's sort of become a workshop.
Fantastic! You sent me the preview. It is.
Thank you.
Yes, I love it. It's great.
But
I
that's almost
Blue Sky, whatever you call Blue Sky. You don't tweet anymore over there. You skeet, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But that has become sort of a repository for riff workshop, basically, and you try out a new idea, and so yeah, some nights that can go on quite a long time.
Right. How does setlist work? One night you're in a folk club, one night you're in a rock club. Do you think about it ahead of time? I've had people tell me they have spreadsheets. They know what they played the last time they were in a town or at a club. So they don't repeat stuff and things like that. And I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah, I think that it kind of, with most of our sets, there's usually certain fixed points that are probably gonna they're probably going to appear whatever, and they're probably going to be in roughly the same sort of place. And then you've just got kind of a sub in and out, and but sometimes it's limited by space. If I've got space to have my dulcimer up there, then we'll play the songs with the dulcimer in. But that's not always the case. So that
But at a
sometimes that can be a
festival,
deciding line. But
right. Festival might say you got 45 minutes and you want to get the hits in. What are the hits? What song would you send someone to and said, "This is Green Diesel"?
oh, that's a good question. I mean, recency bias. There's a couple on the new album that I would always go to. There's a tune called Venus Tree that we put out as a single ahead of time, and that's a good up tempo one. There's a song called Ring the Hill. I think that's probably my favorite at the moment. It covers a lot of bases. It starts off as a quiet ballad, and it gets going, and I think it's about 8 minutes long. Probably one of those, or the instrumental tune sets we do, because they're a big part of what we do as well. And you can
what's the medley one?
So the new album, there's a medley of 2 Morris dance tunes. I don't know if you're familiar with Morris dancing, but if you're into your Fairport and such, you've probably come across it adjacently, if nothing else. Those are always really great to do because it gives Ellen a bit of a showcase on the violin, but also we can get a bit kind of creative with the backing, and
the transition is beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Really, you guys landed a lot of. I feel like a lot of bands have trouble with transitions. It's a train wreck a lot of times. So let us go there with that. It's fantastic. Where am I finding the new one?
So it's up. It's coming out on the 25th of April. It's on our Bandcamp for pre-order. It's only digital
there, right? The singles there. We can listen to the single.
You can listen to the singles already. That's Venus Tree and Ring the Hill. And if you pre-order the album, you get an early access to another track, Onward The Sun. But that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks on CD and digital at the moment. Maybe down the line we'll do a vinyl press, but it costs a lot of money, and we'll have to see what the demand's like for that. But as I say, it'll be on CD or all the usual.
Is it weird? Is it weird to you that the technology that is the most embraced by the music industry is 100 and some years old?
Yeah, I quite like it in a way, actually.
I do too, because it's raw. It captures it. It has grooves. It has little tiny grooves with a needle.
Exactly. And I was saying earlier, it's like music is so much more than just the sound. Ultimately, don't want to go into cliches about reading sleeve notes and everything, but reading the sleeve notes. I mean, come on.
There was nothing like having an LP. And then if it had a gatefold, even if it was a single and it had a gatefold, you were like, wow, I got 2 extra pictures.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm a big physical media guy myself, but
I love it. CDs are a lot cheaper though, and they're making a little bit of a comeback.
I think so. I mean, for someone of my generation, I mean, I love vinyl and I have a decent vinyl collection, but I grew up buying the bands that I loved. I bought their music on CDs, and I still have those CDs, and they're important to me. And too much into music business chat, but it's good for artists these days because they're so much cheaper to produce and they take up so much less space. As I say, I love vinyl, but realistically,
I tell you what, I love that you did 9 songs, that it was an LP. If you release it on an LP, you have 4 on one side, 5 on another. No problem. We aren't worrying about that. I feel like back when CDs first came out, bands felt like all of a sudden they didn't have to do 30 minutes of music. They could do 70 minutes of music, and they did 35 minutes of music they probably shouldn't have done.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, but if you kind of chart our albums across the 15 years or whatever it is, you'll notice the number of tracks gets smaller, I think, with each album.
Right. It's tough, like Bob Dylan. He was his worst. I mean, Infidels, he ruined it. Why did you have Willie McGee on there? Why didn't you have Foot of Pride on there? You put on Union Sundown. Come on. What are you doing, Bob? Anyway, what's next?
So probably, I mean, and in the long run, it will be, album number 6. The ideas are there. We're doing a few dates around the UK. Kind of life pressures at the moment. We've got two parents in the band, so jumping in the van for 3 weeks isn't really an option at the moment. So it's just trying to get the word out there a bit more. Ultimately, we're really proud of what we've produced. So just trying to get as many years on it as we can and see what follows. I mean, we'll still be creating music, whether it could suddenly be a massive sleeper hit or it could just tick along like the last ones have. We'll still be out there. We'll still be going into the room to write new stuff. I have a bit of kind of what I call musical ADHD. I get kind of itchy fingers after a while. So, there'll be.
Have you thought about live streaming?
It's definitely something we'd look at doing. I mean,
your club shows live stream them. There's so many bands. There's a band Eggy. There's a band Spafford, which you're like, I've never heard of these bands, but they get traction within certain communities because they do free YouTube live streams, and it's a matter of hooking an iPhone up and facing it at you guys and running the soundboard into it. It isn't like, and I think it's one of those ways that like a band like Goose or Billy Strings, who I mentioned earlier, got huge during COVID because they did live streams all the time, and you don't maybe necessarily have to tour anymore. Maybe there is a model where you can do shows around Kent, in Kent. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think it's one of the, is this perpetual technology in the music industry and what does it mean type thing. But I think it has its good points, and one of those is that you can reach so many more people. I'm doing the album pre-orders at the moment. I run the office bit, and they're going all over the world, which is great. But much as I'd love to, we're probably never going to do a big tour of Norway, for instance. But maybe with technology being what it is now, Norway can dial in that way, and it'd be definitely something we should explore, because it'd be great to try and gather everyone, metaphorically at least, in one place. That'd be awesome.
Are we allowed to say Brexit was poop?
You certainly are. Certainly are.
I've heard from so many musicians from your guys. I talked to this band Twisted Melons out of Mull of Kintyre. And they, you can't come to the US, you can't do Europe, it's a big wedge. It sucks.
It's not great. The world is getting smaller for music, and it should be getting bigger, really.
It should be. Let me ask you what you think about AI, because you do something that's so authentic and so.
I think with any kind of technological advance, there's all, your first temptation is to kind of think, oh, this is bad, this is terrible, and there's a there's a lot that there's a lot that I'm not sure about with it, but people said the same thing about synthesizers. They said the same thing about plugging a guitar into a speaker, and who knows where it will go. At the moment, the early signs for me aren't encouraging, but it just needs, once creative people can get their hands on the technology and get under the bonnet of it, people will use it to create good stuff, and people will use it to create less good stuff.
I love you. You're talking me down.
But yeah, there are other times, and I think particularly given how, let's face it, pretty basic most of the AI stuff that
right. But what about like the musician that plays out once in a while, has a cool band that they play with, but their main bread and butter is doing incidental music for movies, doing commercials? That's gone. You no
Yeah,
longer have that avenue to be a musician.
exactly. And ditto, you know, ditto recording session work. Not that it's gone, but it's all pretty much garage band that comes with your iPhone. You can, if you know what you're doing, you program in your drums and program in the bass. And
Right.
but my utopian hope, which will doubtless prove to be completely flawed and false, is
No,
that
we want it. We want that.
yeah,
We want
people will thrive on that human connection. It's like I was saying earlier about being in a band as opposed to bringing in paid employees. You want
right.
that kind of human chemistry, because I still don't think that can be replicated. You can make music, inverted commas, but you can't create humanity yet.
No.
Who knows where
Empathy.
we're going?
You
Yeah,
have to have empathy, and I think that there's a huge loss of that, which scares the hell out of me.
yeah.
Anyway, you know about Richard Wright from Pink Floyd? You ever heard the story where he ended up being paid session musician work for Final Cut?
Oh yeah, didn't he? Wasn't he the only? He was the only one who made any money out of the Wall tour because he was on a wage.
Exactly. It's so funny. God help us. What happened with those guys? They could
I
have done
don't.
one more tour. One more tour. I actually saw Roger Waters in '87 and Pink Floyd in '87, about 4 months apart, and Roger's show was so much better. He had a
Uh-huh.
DJ. He played. The DJ was like, "Here's ZZ Top. I heard it on the X." And then the next song, he's like, "Here's Roger Waters with his new one, Radio Waves," and boom, the band came up, and it was a fantastic production. Whereas Pink Floyd was what you expected a Pink Floyd show to be.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, there we go. Anything else you want to throw out before we wrap things up?
I think we kind of gone through a bit. I'd love it if people wanted to check out the record. Obviously, that'd be great. Get my plugs in, but thanks for giving me the opportunity to ramble on
I
about
love it.
my thoughts. So,
All right. So someone suggested you guys to me, friend of mine, and they were like, check this band out. And I was like, I love it. That's how I work. I'm like, oh, I like this. I'll call the band up because, someone told me recently, in the past couple months, that as many albums are released per day in 2025 as were released in the whole year in 1989.
wow. I mean, I can believe that.
How do you break through? How do you break through that? So I'm trying. I'm trying to help you
Yeah,
guys.
it's very much appreciated. So
I'm going to run an outro, and then after I run the outro, hang out so I can thank you off
yeah,
camera.
sure.
Everybody out there watching, like, comment, subscribe, make a comment. Let us know what you think. We're on all the social medias at All That Jam Pod, and we have the .com. And remember, stay beautiful, but don't stay underground too long.